Aloha, everyone, and welcome to Refactoring. We're going to talk about some techniques for cleaning up your code. I need to caveat this with what we're doing is not true refactoring, because to refactor something, you have to have tests. Really, what we're doing is changing code, but nonetheless, I'm going to walk you through some techniques that I use to improve code quality. So I asked for some donations. It looks like I got some. So let's start with this one that Scott submitted and see if we can find a way to clean this up. Oops. All right, so Scott gives us this. This is perfect. Super good candidate for some like bread and butter refactors. To have like some confidence that this works, probably want to actually put it in a page. Because part of refactoring is that, like the definition of refactoring is that we keep the behavior the same, but we change the implementation. So we have to know that we kept the behavior the same somehow. So I'm going to make an index.html. And let me steal some boilerplate. All right, and that is probably enough. We need to grab that main element. All right, cool. So I'll bet this works now.
You want me to send over that function that is called within there?
Oh, yes, well? Please.
Okay.
Yes, add Pokemon listing. All right.
Yeah, I threw it in there with any other functions that might be called as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And let's grab them. All right, excellent. So here's what we're refactoring. Do we have stuff showing up on the page? URL is not defined, so. And this is a single Pokemon?
This was for the list on the main page.
Cool. API v2. All right, cool. Okay, so there's some kind of error here.
Yeah, that's probably also has to do with a few other query selectors that were on there.
Loading is not defined.
There's one for UL called Pokemon. Oh yeah, the loading was just the spinner that I used.
Pokemon is not defined. Okay. All right, cool. Now we're in business. So, let's take a look at this long fetch here. Start there. So, some low-hanging fruit. Anytime you see this, where you've got a fat arrow function that has a parameter and then just immediately passes that parameter into another function, for each is expecting a function definition. Add Pokemon listing is a function definition. So that means we can also do that. And behavior is the same. So I'll write that down as replace inline functions with declarations. That's probably like one of the easiest refactors you can do, and it really does a lot to clean up the logic of your code. And so that's all we did. We took this, and instead of writing that function inline, we just did that. Add Pokemon listing is already a function definition. That will get called by for each with each of the responses. Next thing that I would do is clean up the name in this function. So this says responses. Like it is responses. That's what comes back from fetches, right? But I think we can do better than that. So responses, for each response, add Pokemon listing. And then if you look over here, this ends up being like response.id, response.name. Like it's really a Pokemon, right? So if I change this to Pokemon instead, and I change this to like Pokemon list, now it makes a lot more sense. For each Pokemon in the Pokemon list, call add Pokemon listing. That takes in a Pokemon, and then we take its ID and its name and whatever else. So next, like solid refactoring technique. Make the names more descriptive. And so what I mean by descriptive is I don't describe how it works. You should pretty much never use the data type in a variable name or a function name. Not never, 99% of the time. You should probably not be doing that. You want to describe what it is, like in terms of the domain. So the domain is Pokemon, so we should be talking about Pokemon and abilities and additions and like using that kind of language, not string, array, response, like some of those kinds of things. An exception would be something like that, where it's not any more specific than just an HTTP response. But something like this, anytime you find yourself doing like response.name, response.abilities, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So we want to make those variable names read more like a story. All right, other things that we can do. anytime you see this, where we've got, okay, so this takes in a Pokemon, so it's an object, and we use that that Pokemon's ID, and we use its name, and we use its name. And so each of those has like Pokemon.id, Pokemon.name. We can reduce the noise a little bit by destructuring. So we could say like, I want to take the name and the ID out of Pokemon, like that. That's equivalent to going const name equals Pokemon.name. Const ID is Pokemon.id. These two lines and this line are exactly the same. That's all destructuring is. So now we have those. Now that's just ID. Now that's just name. Now that's just name. That's a lot cleaner. And then we can do one step further. We can actually do the destructuring in the parameters. So we could turn that into name and ID. And now we don't even need that line. Cleans that up a lot.
Quick question on that.
Yes.
So with the destructuring, what you're saying is we just want those two pieces of the big object. So
correct.
Only look at those two pieces.
Right.
Of what
I missed sprites in here also, so we need to pull that out. So now we're pulling out those three pieces of it. Like that. Cool. Next thing I see in this line is too long. So let's see how long it is. Oh, I don't have my column counter anymore. Okay, so this T right here, that's 80 characters in. 80 is kind of a soft limit for how long any line should ever be. After that, it starts getting harder to read. So a couple different ways we could do that. Like a low-hanging fruit one is to just format it differently. So put each attribute on its own line. Hey, remember this? This is one of those questions that everybody got wrong in the first unit over and over again. So we could do that. Now that's less than 80 lines. I also think we could probably just pull this into a variable, and that cleans that up a little bit. So that would be something like image URL is that, and then this is just image URL. And now we can put all those on the same line, and it's not so long anymore. And more importantly, whole point of this, it's a lot more clear what we're doing. So I'm going to go back to what this was when we started. Okay, so we had that. Here, I'll get rid of the highlighting. So that's what we started with. Oops, well, not even that. That. So we had that, and then we changed it to that. That's a little bit easier to follow. Other things that pause there. Questions?
So it's more important to kind of keep it keep it condensed and keep the line shorter than it would be to worry about the whole storing something as a variable that you're just using right below it.
Oh, that's fine. What you don't want to do, the thing I've been chiding y'all about, is storing something in a variable and then immediately returning the variable. That's a waste. Um, Having these, which like we would call an intermediate variable or an intermediary variable, that's fine. Like that can do a lot to make something more descriptive because all of this sprites.versions.generation I, red, blue, front default, that's a mouthful. And so by saving it in a variable, that gives us an opportunity to label it with what it actually is. And that makes everywhere that we use it more meaningful. Other questions? Next thing I would do is split up making a Pokemon listing from adding the Pokemon listing to the page. Those are really two different things. And so what I'd probably do is just return that LI. And then map over the Pokemon list, and then instead of like add Pokemon listing, this is like create Pokemon listing. Take every Pokemon in the list, create a listing for it, and then take the Pokemon listing that comes back from each one of those and append them. Next thing we can do to clean that up one method per line. Oh, another one that I did. Destructure objects. So like one method per line would look like that. And this is Pokemon listing. Hey, what do you know? I am taking a parameter and then just immediately passing it into a function. So how about what is Pokemon.append? Oh, never mind. I need to do that. Oh, hang on. I'm getting myself confused. That's right, because it's up here. That's what the thing is. This is one of the reasons I like these dollar signs. Just reminds me that it's not an object. So it's Pokemon append Pokemon listing. All right, never mind. Then I can do that. I want to call Pokemon.append on everything that comes back from creating a Pokemon listing. Does it all still work? Ooh, sacre bleu, no. Append called on an object that does not implement interface element. Okay, so it got that back okay. And it was working a second ago. I wonder if I do it like this, does that make a difference? Yeah, apparently it does. Oh, I know exactly what it was. So this is a problem with for each and map and all these things. is that they give you this, like each item. They also give you what the index is and the original array. And so it tried to call append on all three of those, not just the first one. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Well, regardless, could I extract the function out of that? So like reduce inline functions or replace them with declarations. So I could do that same thing. Where I say function add Pokemon listing. Like that. So now it's gonna try to pass all three of them in, but I'm only taking the first one. So then this could be come on. Add Pokemon listing. Hey, there we go. Take a list of Pokemon, create Pokemon listings with each one of them, and for every one of them, add it to the page. Pew! Does it still work? Still works. So that part of this code is looking all right to me. Questions so far? So another thing I did in there is break up functions that do more than one thing. So making an element and then adding it to the page, those are two different things. And like this particular pattern, that's a good one to just memorize. Take an array of objects, turn it into an array of elements, add each of the elements to the page. That's a pretty bread and butter kind of thing to do with an API. All right. So other stuff that we can do. Let's take this title case. I do like string as a variable name for this because it'll work with any string. It doesn't need to be a specific domain thing. But we can do one method per line. That's already a lot easier to read. And then if we could take that thing and try to replace the inline function with a declaration. I'll show you another way to do this. You can also just save these as variables, these arrow functions. So we could say const let's see, uppercase first letter. That's the same as like declaring that as a function. But now we can maybe do one method per line. Yeah, I think I like that better. So then this map becomes uppercase first letter. And now we're telling the story of how that string changes. everything in the string gets sent to lowercase. You split it into an array where the split point is wherever the dashes are, so that splits it up into multiple words. You uppercase the first letter of each of the words, and then join them back together with a space. Cleans that up a lot. You could make this its own like function outside of this, but since it doesn't get used anywhere else, I think it makes enough sense to just keep it inside that function. More questions? Does it still work? It still works.
Just for kind of a general rule,
Uh-huh.
what's your favorite method for not falling down a rabbit hole of cleaning everything up so much that it becomes the opposite effect of what you're trying to do?
Sure. I think you want to be able to follow the story of what's happening. And so when you make a change that makes that more difficult, not less difficult, you probably went too far. So like part of what I would do to do that is like that's the least important function in the entire file. So like I want to throw that down at the bottom. I want the important stuff to be first. And so I'd actually probably do that with both of these too. Because this is what this file is actually doing. Everything below that is just definitions.
And that kind of recognition, we can expect that to really just come with time.
Pretty much. Like,
Great.
that's the hardest thing about learning refactoring is you stop when it stops looking like good code. Well, how do you know what good code looks like? Well, you look at a lot of good code.
All right, cool.
But yeah, like I'd also say that when there's too much indirection, so indirection is sequence. We're going top to bottom, and then we go over here for this function, and then that function calls this function, which calls this function, which calls this function, which actually comes back to here. Like when that stuff starts happening, that's probably too much. Function that calls a function that calls a function that calls a function that gets back here. That's what we call a code smell. Especially if like all of these things don't serve any other purpose but being called by something else one time. That's suspicious. All right, some more. Let's put this then on the line below. I try to, when you're doing these then chains, keep them in a little bit. The reason why is I want to see what this entire chain is. That's difficult to do if it's all the same level of indentation. But when I bring this in one, I can trace it back to where it started. That makes following like an asynchronous thread a lot easier. Continuing to extract functions. This parse JSON, that's a good candidate. It takes in a HTTP response and returns that. So then this becomes parse JSON like that. So then I have this parsed response that I get all of the URLs out of. So this risks being a little bit like this, but I kind of want to see what does it look like if I turn that into a function. So like get URLs, and it takes in a HTTP response, or it's really like a response body. And then I don't want to save that into a variable and then immediately return it. So I just return that. Okay, so the question is, does that actually make it easier to read? So if that was const URLs, get URLs parsed response, does that make more sense when you're reading it than that does? I think you can make an argument that it does. Yeah, I'll keep that. Does it still work? It still works. And these fetches. Ooh, that's a tricky one. So I can do parse JSON here, because I already have the function that I made for that. That makes that a little bit nicer. I could take this entire thing inside of the map and make that a function. It's like parse, fetch and parse. Like that. Takes in a URL. And then returns, calling fetch with that URL and then parsing it. So then inside of this map would be fetch and parse. Looks pretty good. And now that I have that fetch and parse, hey, what do you think that is? So I could call this fetch and parse URL, and now I don't need that because it's that is exactly what that is. So I doubt this will actually make anything better, but I want to see if I save this in a variable and then just immediately pass into this, could it look nicer if I take that out and put it there? Because that's the same code. So now we need to make a decision whether or not that is more clear than that. That or that. Yeah, it's not even close. That sucks. That's a lot easier to follow. So I'm going to keep that as is. Maybe though, this URLs, it's like another like symptom that if I save this into a URL and then I do something with it and then I take that and I pass it into something. Let's see if there's like a way to chain this maybe. And there totally is. This could be fetches. And then that still works. Yeah. Get the URLs from the parse response, fetch and parse each of them. That looks better. Yeah, yeah, I like that. So this doing the loading class list thing where we're hiding the loading spinner. We're doing that before anything's actually like created or added. I'm going to show you a really cool trick with promise chains. This is relatively new, but there's another one of these called finally. And what that does is it runs something at the very end of the chain. Whether it errored out or it was successful or whatever else, finally will run at the end of all of that. That's probably a better place to get rid of that loading spinner.
And that finally is going to be different from the catch.
Correct. So that finally is going to run, actually, a better place to put the finally would probably be here. This will run whether or not it catches or just successfully gets to the end of the then chain. So like if you were diagramming that out, there's like a situation where this response is successful or this response was a failure. But regardless, both of them will end with finally. So that's like, it worked, it didn't work, but regardless, do something like that.
Very
cool. That's pretty good. This whole thing here, that could probably be put into its own function. So what's it doing? Create and add Pokemon list. So that's not doing two things because it's not really doing any of the work of it. It's pushing all of that work off to other functions. The one thing this function is doing is mashing all those together. So this would be like create and add a Pokemon list. Takes in a Pokemon list. And then does all those things. So then that one becomes create and add Pokemon list. Like that. Okay, what about this one above it? This fetches all Pokemon. And it takes in a Pokemon list and then does all these things. And then this becomes fetch all Pokemon. All right, and then in this catch handler, log the error, make an element, so maybe a function for like create error, And I'm going to say maybe this takes in the error object. This thing right here. Because then I can put these things in here. They don't have any, like, they don't use parameters at all. But I could also tuck that thing in there. I don't know if I love that, but that kind of cleans that up. Create error. So then I could have like a similar thing that I did here, like a create and add error that takes in the error object and then does all of these. And then that becomes create and add error. And then just to like get rid of our last inline function, we could call that like hide spinner. Doesn't take any parameters, just calls that statement. And then this is hide spinner. Cool. Now this entire thing tells the story of what happens in this file. We fetch and parse the URL. We use the response to fetch all the Pokemon, and then we create and add a list of Pokemon. If anything goes wrong, we create and add an error. Regardless of what happens in here, we get rid of the spinner when it's over. Then when we look at these individual functions, all of them are teeny tiny, single purpose, easy to debug. Most of them are one line. That's a pretty good refactor. Ask me some questions about it.
Were you exaggerating here, or is this like what a final product should look like?
No, that's like what I would do. You can think of functions as a way to label stuff too. So like that's very technical. Take the class list and add a hidden class to it. Hide spinner is what you're actually doing. That makes that a lot more descriptive. It's kind of like wrapping the implementation with a description of what it does. Totally valid reason to make a function. Oh, is it still working? Still working.
So rather than nesting the fetch here, so line 29, we see there's the fetch, which was previously nested. Here, you've pulled that out.
Mm-hmm.
And so previously, we had asked about creating a fetch as a constant, which technically you've done.
Yeah.
And you had advised against it. But the difference here is that you've put that into a function. Is that
Yes.
going to be the real big difference there? Okay, cool.
It's really easy when you're going for one-line functions to end up with all this, with too much indirection. I think this is all pretty good though. Yeah, I'd say that's about the right level of refactoring. Might do my signature dollar signs on these. All right, I would not recommend that any of you start doing this. It's a really easy way to confuse yourself. If this were my code, the next thing that I would do is I don't like that these are that like this one here accesses main just out of the global scope. I don't like that this one gets loading out of the global scope. It makes this function, the term is impure, when it's using something that it wasn't directly given. If I can get away from that, I tend to like to. So how you do that is this hide spinner. Rather than, okay, so hide spinner is a function definition. Finally, needs a function definition. Watch this. All right, so if I pass in loading into this, well, that's a problem because now I'm taking whatever the result, whatever the return value of hide spinner is, which is undefined. That doesn't really do much for me. If I return another function, like that, that's legit. That's a higher order function. And now this hide spinner function has everything it needs just passed in through its parameters. That's a pretty advanced trick. This create and add error, it needs main. You could pass in main and then have this return a function instead. It's still going to get called with error, but now this can be where main comes from. Now, this main comes from its parameter, which was passed in up here. That's like real functional programming, is doing it that way. But like I said, I wouldn't actually recommend that you do that. Just going to confuse yourself. It's possible, though. If I were refactoring this, that's probably what I would do. More questions? Replace inline functions with declarations. Make the names more descriptive. Keep lines under 80 columns. One method per line. Destructure your objects. Break up functions that do more than one thing. If you do all of those, you will have pretty decent code. Let me take a look at another one. This one was donated by Sharon. Thank you, Sharon.
Just a caveat. I know I need to rename all my variables. And
Cool. Well, that's
my
what we're here
API
to do.
that I'm the API that I'm using is constantly updating their content. So I have to figure out how to make that URL link at the bottom of the code work.
Gotcha. Well, without running this, let's take a look at some things that we could do. So some low-hanging fruit. Improve this name. So news API URL. I don't hate that. That's fine. We can keep that. And then this one, just like we did before, make a parse JSON function that takes in a response.
Hey, I have a question.
Yeah.
Because I ran into this in my own. So for line one, like for the variable name news API URL. So URLs should be capitalized, and when you're doing it as a variable, you want to try to do camel case. So would you capitalize URL or just leave it camel case?
You can do it either way. There's no like fixed thing on that. Like I'm doing JSON in capital letters here. You could have talked me into doing that also. it's totally reasonable to do that instead. That's like a style guide thing. So you want it to be the same throughout a project. You want it to be the same like across your team, but there's no hard and fast rule on that. I see it both
Okay,
ways
thank you.
all the time. Great question. All right, so anytime I see a number in a variable name, that feels like a hint to me that we're doing something wrong. So like I would change the HTML on this. Also, flex header and flex article, those are probably describing like what the how the element is implemented. It's not describing what they are. So like if this is a header, awesome. Like we already have a way to describe a header. If it's a particular header, like that's fine. I'll take that. But describe what it is, not what the HTML is. And so if this one is an article, and you only have one article on the page, yep, call it that. So then this becomes, and that becomes.
Created 4 separate containers for 4 different articles.
Cool. So what's the difference between the articles?
They're different sources. Like it's the science news. So one article might come back from, science.com or something. And then the other one comes back. It's all in the same API though.
Gotcha. Is it the same ones every time?
No, they're different.
Gotcha.
All day long, they change all day.
Gotcha. So, primary article, I would take that. Secondary article, tertiary article, I don't know what the 4 is. Quaternary article.
I'd almost think that it's a good use for just an unordered list and just do a list of articles.
Oh, yeah.
If you have 4 different ones, why be naming them? Just do them all as LI elements and just call it good.
So we could do this. I'm into this. Articles like that. And then like iterate through them, maybe. That'd be fine. Or even if I wanted a particular one, I could destructure that out of this. So you can destructure with arrays also. So that would be like first article, second article, third article, fourth article. I could get talked into that. If it's the same thing that gets done with all of them, then yeah, if this is like articles, all list, like that should mean array, that should mean iteration. So if that's that, then maybe we're doing some kind of articles dot for each or articles dot map or something like that. I would buy. Let's say we get this primary article or whatever. And then this response.articles1. So that's the second article. I'll take that. Another, I don't know if it's like strictly needed in this case. This is called a magic number. And a really common refactor is label magic numbers. They're called magic numbers because why is it 1? Why not 0? Why not 2? Why not 3?
Well, it was 0, but then they changed the article for the 0 and it didn't have a picture. So I wanted my site to have pictures, but they're changing them all day long. So.
Oh man, then you probably don't want to change your code every 20 minutes.
No, that's what I'm trying.
So then you just need to be able to handle the case where it doesn't have an image. Like that's
Right.
one of the things that you learn from that is like, all right, not all these have images. So what do I do if it has an image? What do I do if it doesn't have an image? But like that one could be something like first. It's like article with image index equals 1. And now that gives it a label. So when you come back to this in a month and can't remember why the fuck you chose index 1 for this, you've labeled it. That's how you get rid of a magic number. Here's a pretty handy one. So I would group these differently. All right, so this is other group right now. We get all the DOM elements. We do this stuff that we need to do with the article, and then we append all of them to the page. I might group those more like maybe something like this. We're grouping all of those things together, and then these, maybe article. So you play with it. There's no like formula for this, just something you play with. Try looking at it a couple different ways. When you can get some stuff that has like a little bit of symmetry to it like this, that's usually a sign that you're on the right track. It might even be worth doing something like, well, since these have the same shape to them, maybe that means that that's a function. So that would be something like, I don't even know what it's called yet, but it takes in a selector and like a string. And is there a way that I could like kind of make this match that? So that would become the selector. That becomes the string. And then this doesn't have to be the article or whatever, that's just some element. And so so if I have to name this function, that's something like add to element. So then if I make this add to element, where I am taking in that selector and article.description, does that communicate what I'm doing more than this does? Yeah, I can sort of see that. And then especially if I do that same thing over here, and that's article.title, and this is primary header. Does that communicate the same thing as this, but like clearer? I think you could make an argument that it does. So then I get rid of both of those. And that doesn't look half bad. Now this article here, so that's going to be the value of this. Got to be careful with these names though, because it didn't turn back into an HTTP response. In fact, it's not a response at all. We pulled it out of a response. So really, that should be article. In general, we want like whatever that returns to match whatever that is.
Might be for a different lesson, but John Higger couldn't help me make sure that that URL matched on the response on line 19. It works if I put the link in by hard coding it, but I can't do that because they change them all the time. So,
well, first, we don't need to coerce this into a string. It's already a string. Why? So is the URL null sometimes?
No, I haven't seen one that's been null. So, but it is. I mean, the URL to image that was above it. That worked.
Well, here's why. Look at that. So we make an element. We make an image element. We set its source. Now, again, we don't need to coerce that to a string. It already is a string. And then you append the image. All good. But look what you're returning here. You're returning image source, which, like, I wouldn't do this kind of chain where you're saying article.image is this. Like, you could just say article.url to image or whatever that value is. But that makes whatever that is, here's your problem. So if I make that whatever the like URL to image is, you did URL to image.url. That's why these names matter. They help you catch problems like that, because what you probably meant to do was just that.
They're two different URLs. Like the image has a URL, and then the actual external link to the article has a different URL.
All right, well, that's what you returned over here. So if you want to return the URL of the article, that's probably like that. You can even say like article URL. But you were returning the actual URL, which is fine, and using it there. But you were acting like you were returning the entire article so that you were trying to get the URL property of that. But that's not what's happening. It's already a string. It's not an object.
I'll show you my screen.
Sure.
The code's changed, so I'm not following along since the code has changed. Okay. So the return.
Okay, hold on.
So
Stop. This is the exact same thing. On line 20, what is the data type you're returning there?
A string.
Yep. So on line 23, what's that? You're using that response like it's an object, but what is response?
It's a string.
It's a string. So really, because it's not a response, you got to get the name right. So if you change line 21 to URL, which is what it actually is, yeah. Nope. Not URL.URL. That doesn't make any sense.
It would still be response.url?
Nope. It's just URL.
Okay.
There we go. And also at the end of your then chain, you don't need to return anything. There's nothing after it, so no need to return. Now, our next problem is that on line 20, you're returning the images URL, which I assume is not what you want to do.
It's working. It's returning the image right here.
Right, because you did that on line 18. But you're trying to
He's
link
saying
to the article.
when you click read more, it's going to take you to the image URL.
Correct.
So just don't do a separate then chain at the end. Just put it in the then chain before it.
Oh yeah, and that's a good point. You're not doing anything asynchronous there. So you can just move lines 21 and 22 up into that other. Yeah. And get rid of everything else you're doing. Oh, you still need the close of that then. So delete lines. Nope, still missing it. Maybe. Hold on, undo. Okay, you want to keep line 28. You want to delete everything else. You deleted line 28 too. Oh, maybe. Try your auto formatter. That'll tell us. There we go. Okay, so
so the flex link, which I'm going to change, don't worry.
You just want to make sure you're writing it as hard as possible before you make it easy?
Yeah. Well, I actually got something working on my own, and I was so excited. So I decided to wait on those.
So you just decided you were so excited you wanted to do it in hard mode. Okay, so it's not append. I think you want to set the href, right? Oop, href isn't a function. Nice. But there's also nothing named URL in scope. Where do you get that URL from? Why did you save it in a variable first?
I don't know. That's just what I know how to do.
Okay.
All new to me.
So what else could you do to not save it in a variable? If URL equals response.url, and they're using URL one line later, how could you condense that down to one line?
Make it
You do
equal
response.url on 22.
Response.url on line 22.
URL means response.url. So you can also just write response.url.
Oh.
Oop, you got rid of your href also. URL means response.url, so just write response.url instead of URL.
Okay.
Nope, you replaced the entire line, just the word URL.
Just the word URL.
Just because you said in the line above it, URL means response.url. That means those are the exact same thing. So that's the only thing that you're replacing.
It would have been on the other side of your value that you had there. So href equals, that's where you want to say equals response.url, I think.
Hey, we got there. All right, now delete line 21. There we go.
Okay.
Magic.
Then I'll clean it up. I'll clean it up based
Cool.
on what you already said. So,
Beautiful.
okay.
So, a related idea. I'm going to take you back to geometry. Transitive property. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C.
Right.
So anytime you put something in a variable, that means those are the same thing. That means you could use that variable name or what you set the variable name equal to interchangeably.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right, other questions about refactoring? All right, I hope this was helpful.